Today I'm talking to Max Modell. You might know him as the professional Roundnet player from some viral clips online. But he's also just been a longtime player and student of the sport, a really analytical mind. And I wanted to bring you on here to talk a little bit about your background in stats. So before we go there, why don't you just give the newbies in the chat a little refresher on your history playing Roundnet?
Cool. So thanks for having me, Ben. Really excited to chat. So I'm Max Modell. I'm from Summit, New Jersey. I'm 24 years old. I've been playing Roundnet since 2015, so that's about 8 years now. And I had played for most of my professional career with Hilltop Spikes with my brother Cole Modell. And stats wise, I have a background in computer science and mathematics, graduated from Yale in 2021, and I've been involved in Roundnet stats since 2017.
Going back almost 6 years now, almost seven really, is this Roundnet stats track. I'm curious, what were some of the early curiosities you had around thinking about stats? I understand you also used to play a lot of baseball. So what were some influences maybe you brought from baseball or any other sports when you started thinking about how do I break down the game of Roundnet with stats?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was into baseball. I watched and read Moneyball, loved it. Baseball Sabermetrics, had read a pretty good amount of it online, and I was interested in seeing what was out there for spike ball Roundnet. This was back in 2017. There wasn't anything out there yet. So it started with me taking stats manually on a notebook, just myself, watching back games that I played at tournaments or pickup. I would just take stats on whatever I thought was interesting. So of course, serve percentage, aces, ace percentage, put away percentage, errors, mistakes, those kind of things. Pretty basic. Um, I was really just jotting down manually all the stat categories that I found interesting. And then when I got to college in 2017, I took my first computer science course and I had to come up with some sort of final project for the course. And I tied it into Roundnet stats, being very into Roundnet at the time. And so that program that I wrote was basic, but its input was to take a string of numbers, which represent the four players on the net, and the order of touches from a particular rally, and derive from that the stats that I was interested in. So of course it starts very basic. The first number, it's players 1 through 4. If player 1 is the first digit in this string, they're the player who served. So you can derive that they made their serve. And you can see all the changes of possession if you're assuming, say, 1 and 2 are on the same team as 2 and 3. So that was where I started to try to automate stats, and it grew from there.
Yeah, it's a whole fun like subset of like computer science and like building out the tool. As far as like building these stats out, once you started having this like application availability to give you these stats maybe more quickly than you were getting them by hand, did you then take them and start applying them to inform new strategies or adjustments for how you played, how you try to find points and breaks advantages when you were competing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was mostly watching film on other players that I was playing against at the time. So this is back in
Okay.
2017, and everyone was trying to take down the legendary Chiswick Showalter. So I was watching a lot of Chiswick Showalter film, of course. And as the suspicions were, Tyler Chiswick, of course, had like a 95% serve on percentage. And yeah, I would just use this for my own personal benefit of being interested in what kinds of stats my opponents were putting up.
And so over the years, you eventually find your way into like building out not just like this tool but also publishing an application. Tell me a little bit more about taking this idea of okay, I'm going to analyze people's games faster and more efficiently and I'm going to win. When did it become, oh, I can now give this to the community and serve other people? Maybe they'll find value the way I am, just whether it's appreciating stats from a viewer perspective or maybe as a tactical player I can get a competitive advantage. What kind of spurred that next step of this project?
So truthfully, it started as an interest in me wanting to figure out stats about Roundnet, about people I was playing, about myself. And so I wanted to make an easier way to do that. So that's when I wrote this program. And then afterwards, it became a little bit less Roundnet focused or motivated and more wanting to learn computer science and teach myself app development. It was motivated by my once Roundnet partner and also college roommate, Johan Todi, who you know, Ben.
Good
Johan
shout.
was the one who, yeah, Johan was the Ben who was the one who put me onto app development. So it was more of a personal project undertaking in the computer science field than a Roundnet motivation that got me into wanting to make it an app. But of course, once I started making it into an app, I was envisioning all the ways that people could use it, and what I was hoping that it would result in is this large data set of people going out and recording stats on all their own games, whether it's pickup or tournament games, and I would be left with all this data that I could run models on or do whatever I found interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just I could definitely relate on having a passion and being like, can I channel this passion through Roundnet and learn some skills? I think a lot of people find that in lots of ways. Maybe not as many computer scientists doing like heavy coding projects that way, but certainly more creative types are coming into the sport too now, and just trying to find ways to grow or express creative skills the same way. So you talked about wanting to get more stats from players. Tell me, what was the process? How much time and energy went into getting your app published on the App Store?
So the timeline of this is about the spring of 2018, and I would say I would guess 10 weeks during that 13 to 15 week semester working on this, probably 20 hours a week. So maybe we're looking at 200 hours, maybe 300 hours of working on this, and then getting it through to the App Store and maintaining it is a whole other slew of responsibilities. It costs $100 a year to have an Apple membership to post apps to the App Store. There's a whole review process where someone working for Apple will click through and make sure that your application, all the pages on it are reasonable and conform to their guidelines, their community guidelines. So it's a process to get your app reviewed and approved and all that.
So it's $100 that one time fee, or do you have to maintain that every year now?
$100 one-time fee, and I think I also pay $5 a month for the backend database, where all the stats are stored. And yeah, I so yeah, $60 a year. I've just eaten that as chalk that up to, that'll be a
Yeah,
personal
that's the
project
steady
cost.
state.
It's the steady state. It's what I've maintained since 2018.
But that initial launch was on the order of hundreds of hours, if I'm understanding. Of basically, it's an iOS developer doing work, and of course, it's not like you were a senior iOS developer, but you're at least an upstart iOS developer with quite a bit of skill to build this going into that. So yeah, there's a lot of talent and just energy going into making this happen. On top of you're also paying just to put it out there, even if you somehow magically made this app for free. So I just wanted to like make sure I was understanding that and summarizing that for everyone, that there's so much that goes into this, but yeah, a lot of like blood, sweat, and money, which is kind of wild. And so you mentioned initially you were thinking about, hey, I've worked all these hours, I have to get all these startup costs hopefully covered, if not maybe make a little bit of payback on my own time. Um, so you want to price the app and get some revenue from it. I say that seems pretty fair for like the average person who's creating an app. What were the thought processes on where you priced it, and could you speak more to like what that initial reception was of downloads and how that revenue worked?
Yeah, so that summary is exactly right. A couple hundred hours of time spent into it, an estimated cost of Apple membership, $100 a year, and database being coming out to $60 a year, so $160 a year to maintain it. And so right when I put this out, I spent a couple hundred hours, and I was like, yeah, I feel like people would pay for this. People are paying $80 or $60 for a tournament. They go to 10 tournaments a year. We're talking 500, 600 plus dollars. I'll make my app for $3. I think people will see the value in that. And I ended up getting 40 downloads in the first week. So I made $120 before taxes, and whatever Apple takes out of that, I forget the percentage. And I think it's honestly
Yeah,
like
they take at least
30%.
30, right?
Yeah, it's something
But
crazy.
let's pretend you take $120 anyway, just for argument's sake.
Yeah, pretend we take $120. That'll get me through the majority of 1 year. But yeah, so that was a little bit, I wouldn't say upsetting because I know I guess I would say it was upsetting. I spent hundreds of hours on it. It was less about the money at that point, but I was like, damn, only 40 people download this. I just spent a couple hundred hours on it. So within a week, I just made it free, and I think I got 1,000 downloads in the next 2 weeks.
So those decisions didn't happen in a like a vacuum, right? I think what's important to emphasize is, did you what kind, can you speak to what the feedback was of, hey community, hey everybody, like I made this app, I worked really hard, it's gonna be $3. Um, how would you summarize what the feedback was, or the reception was of, hey, I'd like you guys to give me $3, I worked really hard on this thing and I think it's super valuable?
It's a great question. I made an Instagram post on Hilltop Roundnet Instagram. I was really stoked about it. I put a lot of time into the post as well, And I made the post, and there were a bunch of comments that were like, "Oh, this is a money move, total money move," or $3. Why isn't this free? And I was like, oh, maybe that's just haters or whatever. But then it only ended up getting 40 downloads in the week. I was like, damn, I guess this is just the sentiment. But yeah, people were commenting that. I was surprised. I didn't really care to, I guess, defend it or myself to people. I don't think I was going to reply to random people that I've never interacted with before. Well, blah, blah, blah. I spent 300 hours on
Yeah,
this
it's hard to
and
take
tell
care
you
of the
my
trolls.
cost. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't really address the trolls, but it ended up only yielding 40 downloads. I was like, maybe this is the sentiment beyond just the few trolls. So that was after about a week of that, the thought process was I made this app one for me as a personal growth and development project with computer science, learning being the main motivation, and also, of course, really cool for Roundnet. I want to push the boundaries of what we're doing in Roundnet and stats. But again, it was for me. And the second motivation was I didn't make this so that I could look at it. Like it was for me for my learning, but now that I have it, it's not just so that I can look at it on my phone and use it at pickup. I wanted other people to have it and use it. And so if $3 really was going to be the barrier, I wasn't prepared to die on that hill. So that was why I made it free. I was like, I'd rather have this in 1,000 people's hands than 40 who paid me $3. And I offered to Venmo back the $3 to all the people who paid for it after I turned it free, and none of them took me up on it, which was nice.
Yeah, a lot of happy customers. The real customers at least.
The
That's
OGs who supported it.
yeah. I mean, that's obviously a really hard decision to make of like, oh, like I have this thing and it's like I know it's really valuable and important for everybody, but also if I just give it away, then people will just be like, thanks, and then not maybe value it the same way that those people that you offered to give, Venmo's refunds. They were like, no, no, like this is totally worth it. That's super challenging, especially when yeah, you're not coming from this as like a, hey, I'm gonna make this app and I'm gonna make $1 million and like this is my life's work. You're like, this is fun. I'd love a little money back. So you didn't maybe too much stake in it at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, as far as kind of what you got out of it, you got a lot of impact on this. 1,000 people download this app. I'm sure lots of people use it over the years. I know I personally was like an avid user of it. You'd have to fact check me. I feel like I was one of those OG 40, but I, I,
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't know 100%, but I don't think I flinched to the $3 at the time. I was still in school myself too. But yeah, $3. Like you said, I was one of those people who was spending $500 on registrations at the time. But thinking about impact, you get this app out to lots of people, but then you look maybe even further into the future and you're thinking, how can I maybe aggregate all this information into some sort of database, not just for you to look at on the back end, but also for everybody to look at and maybe start building this crowdsourced repository of information, not just about how do I play as a player, but how do I play compared to everybody else and who's the best, who's got the best rates of serve receive, who's the best defender, who's got the best serve percentage, who's got the best round player rating, which I don't know if you want to dive in that tangent, but we didn't even touch on the
Oh my
history of that, which
gosh.
is kind of along the way here as its own kind of
Did
like little mini innovation.
did not talk about round that player rating. That's crazy. We will have to go to that. Also, as
Okay, so let's
a,
let's
a
let's yeah
side a
let's
side bit
put a
of
pin.
information,
Yeah.
side bit of information, you were more than one of the first 40. I remember you were helping me test it out before I even released it to the App Store. You and Ezra were two people who I added as my beta testers to help me play
Gotcha.
around with
Okay.
the app and give feedback. But yeah, anyway.
But yeah, as far as roundup player rating goes, I don't know if I was your beta tester. I know I was at least like I debated you on how you were coming up with these formulas. I was like, you're just making up math, Max. What's this about? But yeah, tell a little bit more about what was the roundup player rating like idea back in the day. I even like pulled up an old article that you wrote um, about like your vision of it. You wrote it on the Rally blog, which was the old like Spikeball Tour series like content platform.
Yeah, wow. I totally stepped completely over this element of RoundNet stats history and of my personal um, journey with RoundNet stats. So this was even before I started studying computer science in college. This was at the end of high school. I think I made it my English class senior project. Yeah, my English class senior project that we were allowed to do anything. It wasn't really English related. And I made this stats model for the RoundNet player rating. So this was when I was taking stats completely manually. Overview here, I did some um, research on baseball sabermetrics, QBR quarterback rating in the NFL, and I was just reading about these stat formulas which are used as metrics to just give you one number to gauge how well a player performed. So I did a lot of research on this stuff, and I wanted to come up with something for Roundnet. So we're looking at QBR, passer rating here. This is football, yeah. And so I wanted to come up with something for Roundnet. So it involved a lot of thinking of breaking down um, a Roundnet player's game and performance into different categories. And the categories that I came up with at the time were serving, hitting, defense, and efficiency, which I think in this article is named cleanliness, which is a ridiculous name that you clowned me for as well, Ben. Later rebranded as efficiency. I
I'm
regret
glad
that
I get
name.
credit
It's
for that
very
because I
silly.
don't necessarily remember clowning you for something, but I just remember like trying to poke lots of holes in this because I love the brainstorming phase of any project.
Yeah, so anyway, I broke this down into these four different categories with the weights attributed that you see here. And then I came up with a different formula for each of them that I thought was kind of representative of how they factor in, how they each factor into a holistic view of a roundnet player's performance. And they each scale differently. So for example, serving doesn't really have an upper bound. You can hit, there's like some factors like 5.5 points or 5.5 roundnet player rating points that you get for each ace. So yeah, if you hit 20 aces, yeah, there you go. It's going to be through the roof. You're serving. It's going to account for way more than the 30% that it was allotted to. And I think the original breakdown was something. I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds here. Maybe we should just link this article.
I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's all
Okay.
fascinating. I'd say anybody who's listening to something about RoundNet stats is probably here for all of this. I'll definitely link to the article. I probably won't like screen share it too much, but maybe share a couple screenshots intermittently of like all the little tidbits Max is sharing.
Yeah, cool. So I'll touch on two small things here. So one thing that I think is interesting is that serving is attributed to be account for roughly 30% of a player's holistic performance, but it's unbounded here, you see, because if you have 20 aces, then we're already looking at like 100 points here. Whereas that's way more than the 30% or 30 points that a good or average scorer could be allotted. Whereas if you scroll up to hitting, if we look at the hitting category, which is 20%, yeah, it's 20 minus 20 times your put away percentage. So it's maxed out at 20. It can't ever be more than 20%. And I think that's reflective of the way that Roundnet is played, where it's like if you put away all the balls at 100% rate, you did a great job hitting. And to many pro players, that's kind of what you should have done in the first place. If you didn't put away a single ball and you got D'd up one time, especially back in 2017 before there was no hit zone, it was like, well, what are you doing? You had a bad game. You got D'd up once. You can't do that. You probably lost by a break. So that's why it was reflective. I tried to make these formulas reflective of how the fact that these categories actually factored into the feeling of how you played in a game. So similar with
Right.
defense. It's defense. If you get
Like
no
if you're
touches,
winning if you're
yep,
winning or losing, like you need to represent that as effectively as possible by these like categories for people
yeah,
who maybe are new to this.
exactly. So a lot of this was me looking at tens of games that I had taken the stats manually for. I didn't have the stats tracker app at this point. I just taken stats manually and I was playing around with these different factors that we're looking at here, like D touch NR, defensive touch not returned, plus zero point 0.4 times hitting D touch R, defensive touch that you did return to the net. These factors, like this zero point 0.4, these are things that I was just playing around with so that at the end of
Hmm.
the day, ideally, you just plug in these numbers and you get a score that feels like it makes sense as someone who's intimately familiar with the game and what it feels like to have a good game. That is a little bit hand wavy and wishy washy, but I really poured a lot of time into making it feel like it's a correct score. And
Yeah,
yes,
I want to maybe give credit here is like you didn't just like publish this article, like you looked at lots of games of data, and I think you played with levers to see like, hey, I watched this game, this player played well in this game. Does that show up in the stats and this formula output that I have? And how does that person compare to this other player that I would have judged to have played a worse game? So you were kind of when people think about like maybe like training or like models that are a little more advanced, like you were almost like labeling the data like manually as like I am Max and I say that this is a good player and that's the answer. And if this stat gives me a good player result, then like I give it a thumbs up. Like then the formula is good. And if it's the opposite, if I think this player played badly and their score is good, then we need to fix the formula. Like the formula should reflect that similar opinion of, hey, I watched the game, they did not look good, they did not make their sets, they got aced, they made errors.
it really was exactly like that. Like I was the model that was being trained by watching these games and meticulously looking at the stats and really just trying to think, engage, and feel, does this score feel representative of how I feel they played watching this right now. And it is subjective to that degree, but I really did pour over the stats and I made sure that it felt right with respect to each of these categories. And then I tried to tweak it from game to game. And this is what I arrived on. And to be honest, it feels like it has stood the test of time a little bit better than I could have imagined.
Yeah,
I still use it now and then. Like I'll plug in a game here and there, and I'll watch. So if you're the stat taker, also as a little bit more context, RPR, Roundnet Player Ratings, which is what this model is kind of the final output of passing your games through or tracking your games through the Roundnet Stats Tracker app that I
yeah,
described
you're putting a lot
having
of work on my
created.
graphics department right now. You're demanding quite a few like screenshots to like pop up over this conversation. So we'll see what's in the editing budget. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. Is so there's Roundnet Stats app. You made this whole thing that like takes the string you were talking about, and over the course of the game, you have all these strings of it detects this person touched the ball, and that person touched the ball, and then it has some sort of sentiment about what that means, what happened on that point, and then at the very end, it takes all those points and says, "Here's everybody's score based on hitting, serving, defense, and efficiency, formerly known as cleanliness." Um,
Yes.
so if you do this, if you do the roundnet stats, you get the roundnet player rating. Is I think the like the A to B.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And the Roundnet Player Ratings came first, and it came from me having to sit there and manually watch all these games, and then finally land at a player rating, and I want to make that
Right,
easier.
I
So
got
that
like
was,
these manual spreadsheets of these games here on the
oh my
article
gosh, yeah,
where it's like,
yep,
yeah, well, you weren't working on an app initially when you were testing this. You were just taking games manually and saying like that looks good. Um, yeah, I guess
yep.
as one last footnote, do you want to talk about like the scaling here as a small note?
Yeah, totally. This was another huge thought that went into it, which was I wanted the scale to make sense to someone looking at just the scores from the RPRs from a game. I wanted the scale of the scores to make sense. So with the quarterback, the QBR passer rating in the NFL, the maximum score is 156.3, which is incredibly random, but it's scaled that way so that if a quarterback scores of 100 or higher, that is considered an excellent game. So that was the motivation here, where I wanted it such that a score of 100 in the RPR would be an excellent game, 90 is an average game, 75 is a poor game. It's like a relatively intuitive scale considering A, B, C, the grading system that most of us came up on. So it kind of closely aligns to that. That was the motivation for taking this scale, and it still preserves the categorical breakdown that we described earlier of the different categories around it. Just scales it depending on, oh yes, the factor at which I scale RPR scores was based on the original data set of like the 60 games that I watched to come up with the model. So maybe,
Right.
yeah, in 2023, maybe we are well overdue for a fresh rescaling with a new scale factor. We probably are.
It's
I'm probably
entirely
not
possible.
gonna, gonna do that.
I will say
But
on that front, I just checked my notes. I remember texting you earlier this year because I was taking stats on some matches from the Spike Balls Richmond major. I asked you what was the best game you could remember RPR wise, and you quoted me at Peter John Showalter having on the order of like a 180 in the 180s in 2017, which is like crazy. I don't know, like we said here, like 100 is an excellent game, right? So I feel like I'll see like 120s, 130s here and there for like really great games. But yeah, I saw a game where Joe Bondi hit just like a bunch of great serves, took over and had a 184, and I was like, wow, that is the best game I've ever seen. So while maybe you need to recalibrate, like or at least could be worth exploring it because opponents are getting just as good as the players. Of course, you could always run it up in a pickup game and score. I'm sure you could score a 200 RPR somewhere somehow. You
yeah,
probably can't in like a meaningful competition still.
you definitely can in a meaningful competition. And to give a little bit more context to the scale, just brief bit of context. If you
Yeah.
were to get the ball at 0-0 and serve 21 aces in a row, you would get 5.5 times 21, so roughly 100, and then you wouldn't you would get 0 points for defense because you had no touches. You would make zero mistakes, so your efficiency would be high, your hitting would be high. You would probably come close to like a 200 score, I would imagine. So this score from PJ of 181 or whatever it was is nearly equivalent to getting the ball and acing out. That's how crazy that is. Now, there is technically
Yeah.
no theoretical max to an RPR because it is a team sport after all. You could get the ball, ace, then your partner gets ace back, then you get the ball, you ace. It can go on infinitely. and you're not
I
really getting
guess
penalized for your partner's
that's a good
mistakes.
point. Is like your efficiency over the span of like a normal game. I know like in pitching, it's like how many strikeouts you get per 9 innings, or like for like basketball players, it's like how many points you score per minute. What's your plus minus per minute? So if someone ever wanted to cook the books and play a game to like 100 and just stay really tight, like their teammate could get they would get a zero theoretically, right? You can't go negative, but you could give your teammate a zero, get like a several hundred points worth of scores.
You can go negative. A mistake is nearly the same value as an ace, which I think makes sense. If you completely botch a set, but then you get an ace next point, it's kind of like neither of them happened. So that was
Mm-hmm.
also part of the balancing effort that went into coming up with the weights of what each action in and around that game is worth when coming up with this model. But yes, you
Yeah,
can
a little bit of
theoretically.
zero sum, right? The same way that one team wins, one team loses, one team breaks, one team gets broken. Someone's RPR
Exactly.
goes up, someone's
That's
goes
the
down.
idea. It's not exactly zero sum, um, but
But
yeah, it
the maybe the vibe of it is
the vibe of it
very
is certain
similar.
components were developed to be zero-ish sum. Yeah.
Was there anything else you want to touch on? This is a beautiful tangent. I had footnoted on RPR.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up, Ben. This would have been a shame to have missed this one. That's
Okay,
pretty much all
that's
I've
why you
got on the
bring notes.
mind.
That's why you bring notes to an interview. That's why you bring notes. I maybe was almost a little late on it because I forgot that it needed to maybe be before the app. I was like app and then RPR because that's what happens formulaically for me is I get the RPR after I use the app. But we're back. We're back from the RPI or like wormhole, and so you have all these people now running their stats, getting their Roundnet player rating spit out, and it becomes a question of hey, can maybe we combine these things, build like a public tool, a resource for people to just kind of look at a leaderboard maybe of who are the best players by category, by overall stats. And so tell me a little bit more about this next phase of evolution into the Roundnet reference.
So the Roundnet reference is what is currently the last, maybe final phase of my stats project. This came 4 years, 3 years after I developed the Roundnet Stats Tracker app. Um, that was in 2018. So then, yes, in the spring of 2021, this ended up being my senior thesis project for computer science and math in college. I made Roundnet Reference inspired by baseball reference, basketball reference, just these not super flashy, pretty basic websites that aggregate tons and tons of years of historical data from whatever the sport is. So yeah, basketball reference I would use all the time just to check out stats. Baseball reference too, just being interested in those sports. So I wanted to create a similar database, publicly accessible for Roundnet stats. So that was Roundnet reference, and I thought no better way to do this than to combine it with this stat taking tool that I already have, which is the Roundnet Stats Tracker app. Now I thought nobody is really going to sit there and um, spend hours upon hours just logging, or we can't pay somebody to go watch all the historical Roundnet games so that we can populate this database in the same way that the NBA and the NFL all have, of course, paid stat takers live doing it to input these stats and have APIs such that third parties like basketball reference, baseball reference can make their databases and websites and whatnot. So it's all super manual and grassroots driven and community driven. So I wanted to connect it to the Roundnet Stats Tracker app. So I developed this second mode in the app that where a user can become a registered official stat taker by passing an exam on the Roundnet reference website. So they log into their account, they pass this really quick 5 to 10 minute exam, which is um, a bunch of YouTube clips that I put together, and then multiple choice questions, which is like, oh, how would you grade this point? Or what would be the play string that you should enter for watching this rally, to kind of gently guide people to use the Roundnet stats tracking app correctly. There's already a brief tutorial in the app, but this is like for a little bit more fine-grained practice with using it.
Right, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and if you have two different people watch the game, they should agree on who made the error, who got the credit for the set, and those kinds of small things.
Exactly, that's the goal. It's very hard to enforce. I had ideas for how we could do that in the long run. Obviously, very far from that. I could speak on those ideas in a bit, but yes, the overall approach was have people register as become an official stat taker. They're approved. They know what they're doing. Then they can go into the Roundnet Stats Tracker app and watch independently, just watch games from tournaments, from STS majors, challengers, games that they're interested in reviewing on their own, just because they're interested in it, or maybe it's the players themselves and they're already going back to watch their own film. So, they might as well just record the stats through the app. They want to see how they did, or they're willing to contribute to the global stats database. So the idea was that if you're an official stat taker and you take stats in a game, you input all the metadata on the tournament, the players, and it'll get funneled directly onto the Roundnet Reference website. And there we also have leaderboards and cool filters on tables and aggregating data and a couple small graphs and displays.
Yeah, you don't want to take for granted, but it's like, oh yeah, and also just some cool visualizations, like standard like stuff you'd see on another sports reference website that a lot of people probably are exploring when they're trying to figure out things about like other sports, like who is the most like triples this year, like what's the best shooting percentage right now, who's got the best QBR. So yeah, we don't have that, and similar to what we mentioned with trying to price this app initially and say, hey, like I put all this work into this, how much is this worth to you to be able to have this and use it? Similarly for the sport of Roundnet, it's also hard to say how valuable would that reference be to have. It sounds like an awesome thing, and there's so many other things that are exciting about Roundnet. Like when you first put this out, what was the reception around that? I know we talked about like, oh, it's a money grab. Like the second time, was there maybe more excitement around it because you said, hey guys, this is a community project. We can take this as far as we want to take this. I can't do it alone. Like what was that dialogue like?
People were not calling this one a money grab because it was free, of course. So I dodged a bullet there. But there wasn't a ton of excitement around it, which was, again, okay. I was doing most of this for me. This was my senior project in college. And even if it wasn't, I was doing it because I was very interested. But there wasn't huge buzz around it. The people who are maybe more in that OG crew of already being very interested in this, they were pretty hyped about it. And there were a couple, I think maybe like 30 to 50 people registered as official stat takers and ended up putting up games. And I tried to incentivize a little bit on the Roundnet Reference resources page. You can see there's like a leaderboard of who has taken stats on the most games.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, I was trying to think of other ways in an ideal world how to incentivize it, incentivize people to take stats on games. But yeah, it didn't really take off. I didn't promote it much or anything. Again, it was one of those things. I've tended to have this thing with personal projects where I'm incredibly invested in it and super into it. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but I'm so into it when I'm doing it. And then I finish it, I publish it, and I'm like kind of like, meh. I got what I
Right.
wanted out of it. I was just saying nobody really stepped up and was like, yo, this is sick. I'm going to take so many stats with this. Or like a couple people did, but it takes a much larger effort that I had spent so many more hours doing the Roundnet Reference website than the stats taking app. It was just so much work underneath the hood to connect the app and the database to the website and all that, and have that be a separate flow from normal users just recording stats on their own pickup games, have it be an official flow. There's so much work under the hood there. I probably spent like 50 hours a week for 10 weeks during my school semester doing this.
You shouldn't be so hard on yourself to say it didn't go somewhere when for you kind of approach it with this mentality of this is this personal project. I'm really excited about it. This is the goal I have. I want to see if I can build this tool. I want to see if I can build this server and this crowd sourced platform and these training manuals for people to try. And that's the part of it that I control. And obviously you in theory do also control how much marketing push you put out there, how often you're just like using other platforms. You have like Hilltop. Obviously you built a really big platform with your team with Cole, where you say this is somehow a priority for Hilltop to promote Max's project, which I'm sure you did a little bit of, but at a certain point it becomes a question of what actually is the goal to get out of it. Is it to have done the work and say, oh, I built this really like cool project, or is it to also have a certain amount of impact? What kind of world would you want to have for Roundnet Reference, and what would maybe the perfect state look like for it?
I think the perfect state would look like you have a set of stat takers who are trained and understand how to take stats with the app, and they're interested in it, and they're going to watch back this film anyway because they're interested in it. So they might as well take the stats on it, and we can pay them for it. And then at the end of the day, the entire community has this reference where they can see leaderboards and in-depth stats on all the different games and STS challengers and majors, see how many aces this person had in the finals, see how that compares to their semifinal performance. Maybe they peaked in the semis, that's why they lost in the finals. Go into depth into why they lost, what they really did great in the semis, and that's why they won. Really just have a resource for that kind of in-depth analysis that is complete, because it's hard to have leaderboards if the stats aren't complete. If you only have one tournament, if you only have one round from a tournament, if you only have a couple games, it's just not complete. And so that was kind of the roadblock that I think the Roundnet reference ran into, where you would get people who were interested in watching back the finals of this STS challenger. So then they took the stats on it and say, oh, that's pretty sick, but we don't have a ton to compare it to. Or maybe now the leader on some stat category is some random person that did their own stats for 15 games at a tournament. And it's like, okay, that's really cool. And I'm super stoked that they're using the platform, but I guess the leaderboard isn't super valuable right now because it's not a complete data set.
Right. It maybe feels a little bit like an all or nothing
Yeah, I
proposition.
think
Like it's
exa-
if you don't have all the data, then it's maybe telling not necessarily an incomplete story, but like almost like a fake story.
yeah,
If this one player that got T9 has the most aces, it's like that's probably not right. Like they got ace more than they aced.
yeah, that's exactly right. And there's no verification as well in terms of stats that people put in, making sure that they're correct. There's just this 10-minute upfront little tutorial that I made. So in an ideal world, those problems are solved. We have a complete data set. There's a system of paid stat takers because I think the groundwork is there for them. There's a way for them to take stats. There's a public website for the stats to be funneled to. There's a little bit of training.
Mhm.
I think it just takes a lot more resources, and it's pretty all or nothing, like you said. And I think that was what I realized relatively quickly after I put it out. It's like I got so much out of this personally, computer science related development, and so much fun in developing it. And I set out this goal and I achieved it. I wanted to build this and I did it. So I was content in that regard. And I think once I pretty quickly realized that it was this all or nothing scenario, like you said, my interest kind of dropped off because I'm not really going to spend a ton of time and definitely not going to spend a lot of money marketing this thing.
I don't want to get like too like critical, but I guess if I can push you to like a little harder on this, it's what could like a next step look like? Because of course, between like where we are now with stats, which is like people kind of just do it on their own. There's like some fun people, not well, everyone's fun, but some people are having fun going out there and just taking their own stats and analyzing their own games. Some people share it, some people don't share it, and then they use it in different ways. How do we go from where we are now to like take one positive step for having a communal, you know, like stat reference, whether it's global, national, regional, because to say it's all or nothing is like, I guess, a fair framing, but also it sets the bar maybe too high to make progress. The same way that you felt maybe a little bit disillusioned at wow, like this is a big thing to take on. So is there something between that could be a stepping stone?
That's a really great question, and it is disillusioning. Yeah, it was disillusioning, but you're right. It is a little bit to say it's all or nothing. It's not really helping take the next positive step. So I would say getting interested people in the community, or money to pay people who are interested, and or money to pay people who are interested to take stats, um, to cover even the finals or the semifinals of the majors as a stepping stone, so we can have a complete subset of the data set. Like if these are all the games that ideally we have, every game from every tournament and every division, that is where it's like all or nothing. But if maybe we can take a complete data set of just the finals of every STS tournament and have one person do that and pay them a little bit of money to make that reasonable on their end, I think that's a reasonable positive step. Now, the Taser guys, Logan
I was going to go
Cornelius
exactly there. Yeah.
yeah, and Brian Childs, they did an unbelievable job with this in 2021,
One.
2021. Yeah, this is about the same time that I was making Roundnet Reference. They were making the roundnetstats.com. And I had worked for a while with Brian, maybe like 6 or 8 months before this, because he was using the Roundnet Stats Tracker app for Taser's Texas Roundnet tournaments. And it was great. I was doing a lot of work just manually off the books to export data from the database specifically to send to him for him to do post-processing analysis on Taser tournaments and make cool graphics and plots of data from Taser tournaments. So I wrote some Python script that did a weekly export of all Taser data and emailed it to Brian and stuff like that. So we were working together for a good 6 to 8 months, and then he was on the side developing the Roundnet Stats doc. I think it's roundnetstats.com, roundnet-stats.com, something like that, with Logan Cornelius, which turned out really awesome. We were doing that at the same time. We almost worked together. Um, that is maybe one of my regrets, that I didn't end up teaming up with them to do that. Part of it was because I had this feeling that I didn't want to devote a ton of time to it. As I said, once I kind of finish a project and put it out there and get a lot out of it, I become a bit resigned from the project for whatever reason and a little bit less interested in continuing it. So I didn't have a ton of motivation to keep working on it. And I think at that point I was like, I'd rather just, let this project that was my baby at one point, just let it be, instead of, taking on another adventure and giving that up. But all that said, in 2021, Brian and Logan and the rest of the team did such a great job of taking stats on men's and women's finals and maybe semifinals. I think just the finals of
I know they did. I know
STS
they do these
tournaments.
really good write-ups
Yeah,
on. I think
that's what I'm referencing.
primarily I think just the Open like Premier Finals,
Okay.
and so even though it was just like one match, unfortunately left you on two, which is a whole other topic. Their website is down, and I don't think there's any like I just skimmed left into his Instagram page. I don't think there's any information about these write-ups there. I might try to pull up one or two for these from the archive. I'm sure Mike or Brian can help us out. But yeah, they took each final, analyzed them just against the other finals to say like not necessarily who's the best player because we have so little data there, but just like how exciting was this match? Maybe looking not necessarily at the RPR level, but also at higher level, just like how many rallies are happening in the game, how many double faults are happening in the game, and looking at things not necessarily from the perspective that you came in from this with, which is I need to study my opponents and exploit them and beat them, but coming from like a big sport perspective view of is this even fun? Is this cool? Does anybody want to watch this? What levers can we pull to maybe make this more exciting, which is on everybody's mind at all times. But it's cool when you actually apply like rigorous stats and thought to it instead of just saying that the game is broken.
100%. Their stats write-ups were the thing that I look forward to the most after every tournament. I loved it so much. Not maybe partially because I'm a big stats and math guy, but they were so well done. They were painting the picture of the story of the finals of this tournament, and they had a narrative that was backed with stats and cool graphs, and they compared it to the finals that they had done the stats for earlier in the year. It was really a great write-up that for each tournament that I very strongly missed from the 2022 season, and that is something that I would love to see back at some point.
Yeah, that could be that. I mean, taking those stats is one thing. I know the write ups just from my relationship literally with Ezra and connection to Mike and Brian know that was like an insane amount of like writing work to crank out. But at least maybe like the stats charts and
Mhm.
just like the maybe the Cliffs Notes shorter form version of that is something I'm sure that they or someone else could do um, on a leaner number of hours,
Yeah,
smaller pro bono budget, right? There's not that there's a huge budget for this necessarily.
I think their model was something along the lines of individual people, customers pay Roundnet
Mhm.
Stats to record stats on their app, record stats on their games for them on behalf of the paying customers. And I think then they would pay the stat takers
Yeah,
to do the stats. And so hopefully Spikeball gave them some money to do it for the finals over the course of that 2021 season for each of the tournaments. But I do see something like that, to go back to your original question, as a possible and realistic next step to try and get stats back out onto the scene. Do something like that again.
yeah.
I think they were onto
We
something
can
there.
yeah we can. I'm sure we could brainstorm for a long time, but like the other route they went was also looking at tournament directors and seeing it as a value add to give to players, saying, hey, if you as a tournament director pay for maybe quarterfinals and beyond, that's a value add for players to get this service provided when you're trying to add more amenities as a tournament director. That was
Mhm.
a cool lever idea to pull. But knowing Logan and Brian themselves run tournaments, knowing tournaments I run, there's always a really cool thing to do with the next dollar running a tournament budget. So that's a whole other world of challenges that I want to unpack. But yeah, like you said, even if it's just a finals match here or there, a little bit of stats here or there gets super exciting. I know for like even the round network like exhibition games we put up of you and Gabe playing assistive touch, in California at the beginning of 2023. We popped up a little stats at the end of the game. We used the RPR like model, and that was fun. It was cute. We didn't do anything incredible. We didn't give people like a narrative on how to feel about it, but it was just a nice little touch that made, you had this fun little production, and then at the end it's like, oh, cool, like this feels like a real thing now. Like there's replays and there's stats. Felt a little more complete as a spectator product. So I'm definitely a fan of it. Similar to you, I also think I just like nerding out on them. I've also done like my own world of like taking my own stats on my own spreadsheets and trying to take cues for how to get a competitive edge. But for people who maybe aren't like the most into stats in general, just the idea of these things being out there to push the sport forward, I think is a really cool thing that you're like, I have this passion for learning these skills. I'm going to apply it to Roundnet, and then getting to that next step of it'd be really cool with a little bit more support from everybody. Man, this could have been even more. Maybe it could be more in the future. Maybe not because of the work you put in, but because of the work someone else puts in. Um, so I really appreciate you sharing your experience with it because I think a lot of people don't know. A lot of people who know don't really play around it anymore. So I feel like this context is super important to have this background so that as the next wave of stats of nerds and also the stats consumers and the people who are supporting projects like this come into the sport, they can have that grounding.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a long time ago too. Fun fact is, I haven't even coded the soft touch rule into the Roundnet Stats Tracker app. That's how old it is, and that's how long it's been since I revisited it. Um, but yeah, I hope that that's helpful context for the spectators and for the next people to come along and take a strong interest up in the stats.
This is great. Let me stop the recording.